Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and enjoy the story. The fluorescent lights of Morrison and Associates buzzed overhead, casting a harsh white glow across rows of cramped cubicles. Sarah Mitchell sat hunched over her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she typed up yet another financial report. Her navy blue blouse had a small coffee stain near the collar, evidence of her rushed morning routine, and her brown hair was pulled back in a messy bun held together by a pencil she'd forgotten was there. The clock on her computer screen read 11:47 p.m., another late night at the accounting firm, another evening sacrificed to meet impossible deadlines. Sarah's eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets all day, but she couldn't leave yet. Mr. Alexander Hartwell, the company's youngest managing partner and heir to a financial empire, had requested these quarterly reports first thing in the morning. Sarah had been working at Morrison and Associates for 3 years, ever since graduating with her accounting degree. She lived paycheck to paycheck in a tiny studio apartment across town, taking 2 buses to get to work each morning because she couldn't afford a car. While her colleagues went out for expensive lunches, Sarah ate peanut butter sandwiches at her desk, saving every penny to help pay for her younger brother's medical school tuition. Her phone buzzed against the desk, lighting up with a text from Jake, her boyfriend of 6 months. Sarah smiled tiredly as she picked it up, grateful for the distraction from columns of numbers that seemed to blur together. Jake. Hey babe, still at work? Missing you tonight. Can't wait to see you this weekend. Sarah's heart warmed. Jake was a construction worker, kind and down to earth, though he didn't always understand the pressures of her corporate job. She began typing back, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Missing you too, Jake. This job is killing me, but I can't give up. You mean everything to me, and I love how you make me feel like I'm worth something more than just numbers on a page. I know we don't have much money, but what we have is real. I love you more than you'll ever know, and I can't wait until I can afford to quit this soul-crushing place, and we can start our life together properly. Sweet dreams, my love. Sarah hit send without looking, then immediately returned her attention to the computer screen. She was so exhausted she barely registered the action, her mind already back on the endless columns of financial data that needed to be organized before dawn. 20 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Expecting another sweet message from Jake, Sarah glanced down at her screen and felt her blood turn to ice. The message thread wasn't with Jake. It was with A. Hartwell, B-O-S-S. Her love confession, meant for her boyfriend, had been sent directly to Alexander Hartwell, the cold, intimidating millionaire who barely acknowledged her existence, except to demand reports and criticize her work. Sarah's hands began to shake as she stared at the screen in absolute horror. The message showed as read, with a timestamp of just 2 minutes ago. He had seen it. Alexander Hartwell had seen her rambling declaration of love, her complaints about work, her mention of being poor, everything. Oh no, oh no, oh no, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible in the empty office. She felt like she might throw up. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment so intense it felt like fire spreading across her skin. How had this happened? In her exhaustion, she must have selected the wrong contact. Both Jake and Alexander's names were saved in her phone, and in her tired state, she had somehow sent the most personal, intimate message of her life to the one person who could destroy her career with a single word. Sarah considered her options, panic rising in her throat like bile. She could pretend it was meant for someone else, but the message was too specific, too personal. She could claim her phone was hacked, but that seemed ridiculous. She could quit before he fired her, but she desperately needed this job. Her phone buzzed again. With trembling fingers, Sarah looked at the screen. Hey, Hartwell. Boss. My office. Now. Sarah's vision blurred as tears of humiliation filled her eyes. It was nearly midnight, but Alexander was clearly still in the building. She had never been called to his office this late, and she knew it couldn't be good. Her career was over. 3 years of hard work, of sacrificing her social life and health for this company, and it would all end because of one stupid, tired mistake. She stood on shaking legs, smoothed her wrinkled blouse, and walked toward the elevator that would take her to the executive floor. Each step felt like walking toward her execution. The elevator ride seemed to last forever, her reflection in the polished steel doors showing a young woman who looked terrified and small. The executive floor was dimly lit, elegant and intimidating, with its marble floors and expensive artwork. Sarah's cheap heels clicked loudly against the stone as she approached the corner office with Alexander Hartwell etched in gold letters on the door. She raised her hand to knock, but before she could, a deep voice called out, "Come in, Miss Mitchell." Sarah pushed open the heavy wooden door, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain Alexander could hear it. The office was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline. Expensive leather furniture, original paintings, and a wet bar in the corner spoke of wealth she could barely comprehend. Alexander Hartwell sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his steel gray eyes fixed on her, with an expression she couldn't read. Even at midnight, he looked impeccable in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair styled with not a strand out of place. At 32, he had built his own investment empire, while also managing his family's financial legacy, earning a reputation as both brilliant and ruthlessly cold. "Close the door," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that made even senior executives nervous. Sarah's hands trembled as she obeyed, the soft click of the latch sealing her fate. She stood there awkwardly, not knowing whether to sit or remain standing, her cheap outfit feeling even more inadequate under the warm glow of his expensive desk lamp. "Sit down," Alexander said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from his desk. Sarah perched on the edge of the seat, her back straight, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to disappear into the floor, but no words would come. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her with those piercing gray eyes. "Interesting message, Miss Mitchell." Sarah's cheeks flamed with embarrassment. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. I was tired, and I didn't mean to." "Who is Jake?" The question was asked casually, but something in his tone made Sarah look up sharply. "He's my boyfriend, sir." The message was meant for him. I didn't intend. She stumbled over her words, feeling more foolish with each syllable. Alexander nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You mentioned wanting to quit this soul-crushing place." Sarah winced. "I'm sorry. I was just venting. I know I shouldn't have said that, even to Jake. This job means everything to me. I really need it, Mr. Hartwell. Please don't fire me over one stupid mistake." "You also mentioned not having much money," Alexander continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Yet, you're helping pay for your brother's medical school." Sarah blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected him to pay such close attention to the details of her rambling message. "Yes, sir. Danny is brilliant. He deserves a chance, even if I have to sacrifice for it." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes, gone too quickly for Sarah to interpret. "You work late most nights." "Yes, sir. I want to make sure everything is perfect for you and the other partners." "And you take the bus to work." Sarah felt heat creep up her neck. He had noticed her getting off the city bus in the morning, had probably seen her waiting at the stop in the rain when her umbrella broke. "Yes, sir." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled as he studied her. Sarah squirmed under his gaze, wishing she could sink through the expensive carpet and disappear forever. "Miss Mitchell," he said finally, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Do you know why I requested those quarterly reports for tomorrow morning?" Sarah shook her head, confused by the change in topic. "Because the Hartford Industries merger depends on those numbers. It's a $200 million deal, and the presentation is at 9 a.m. sharp. Those reports needed to be flawless." Sarah's stomach sank. "I understand, sir. I'll have them ready." "They're already done," Alexander interrupted. "I finished them an hour ago." Sarah stared at him in bewilderment. "I don't understand." Alexander stood and walked to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city lights. "I've been watching you, Miss Mitchell. You stay late. You work weekends. You never complain despite being given impossible deadlines. You eat lunch at your desk to save money, yet you help pay for your brother's education." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. He had been watching her. "Mr. Hartwell, your work is exceptional," he continued, his back still to her. "Better than some of my senior accountants who make 3 times your salary. Yet you've never asked for a raise, never demanded recognition." Sarah didn't know what to say. This conversation was taking a turn she had never expected. Alexander turned from the window, his gray eyes intense. "Your message wasn't meant for me, but perhaps it should have been." "Sir?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "You said Jake makes you feel like you're worth something more than numbers on a page," Alexander said, taking a step closer to his desk. "But what if someone could show you that you're worth far more than you ever imagined?" Sarah's heart began to race for entirely different reasons. The way he was looking at her, the gentle tone in his voice, it was nothing like the cold, distant boss she had known for 3 years. "I don't understand what you're saying," Sarah managed. Alexander sat on the edge of his desk, closer to her now, his expensive cologne mixing with the scent of leather and coffee that permeated his office. "Your message revealed something I've suspected for months, Miss Mitchell. You're trapped in a life that's beneath you, working for people who don't appreciate your value." "Mr. Hartwell, I should go," Sarah said, standing abruptly. "It's late, and this conversation is getting inappropriate." "Sit down," Alexander said firmly, but not unkindly. "We're not finished." Sarah hesitated, every instinct telling her to leave. But something in Alexander's voice made her sit back down. Her palms were damp with sweat, and she wiped them nervously on her skirt. "3 years ago when you started here, do you remember your first day?" Alexander asked, his tone becoming almost conversational. Sarah nodded slowly. "I was terrified. I'd never worked at such a prestigious firm." "I was in the lobby when you arrived," Alexander said, surprising her. "You were wearing a blue dress that was clearly new but inexpensive. You stood there for 10 minutes, gathering courage before approaching the receptionist." Sarah's eyes widened. She remembered that moment vividly, the overwhelming feeling of being out of place among all the wealth and power. "I watched you that first week," Alexander continued. "Most new hires either crumble under the pressure or try to impress everyone with false confidence. You did neither. You simply worked harder than anyone else." "I needed the job," Sarah said quietly. "It was more than that." Alexander stood and walked around his desk, stopping a few feet from her chair. "You have something most people in this industry lack, Miss Mitchell. Integrity." Sarah looked up at him, confused by the compliment. "Thank you, but I still don't understand why you're telling me this." Alexander smiled, and Sarah's breath caught. She had never seen him smile before, not really. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow vulnerable. "Because your text message tonight revealed something I've been trying to figure out for months," he said. "How to approach you without crossing professional lines." Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "Mr. Hartwell, I have a boyfriend." "Jake, yes. The construction worker who doesn't understand your ambitions," Alexander said, his tone carefully neutral. "Tell me, Miss Mitchell, when was the last time he supported your dreams instead of making you feel guilty for working late?" Sarah opened her mouth to defend Jake, then closed it again. The truth was, Jake often complained about her work schedule, made snide comments about her corporate job, and seemed to prefer when she was struggling rather than succeeding. "That's not fair," Sarah said weakly. "Isn't it?" Alexander moved closer, his gray eyes intense. "Your message said you couldn't wait to quit this soul-crushing place and start your life with him. What kind of life, Miss Mitchell? Living paycheck to paycheck? Giving up your career to make him feel more comfortable with his own limitations?" Sarah stood abruptly, anger flashing in her brown eyes. "You don't know anything about Jake or our relationship." "I know he's never picked you up from work," Alexander said calmly. "I know he's never sent you flowers or taken you to dinner anywhere that requires more than $20. I know he makes you feel guilty for being intelligent and ambitious." "Stop," Sarah whispered, tears threatening to spill over. Alexander's expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to hurt you. But Sarah, Miss Mitchell, you deserve so much more." The use of her first name sent a shiver through Sarah. She had never heard it spoken in Alexander's deep voice before. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Alexander reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. "I'm saying that I've been looking for an excuse to give you this for months." Sarah stared at the envelope suspiciously. "What is it?" "A promotion letter. Senior financial analyst, with a salary increase of 60% and your own office." Sarah's legs went weak. She sat back down heavily, staring at the envelope as if it might explode. "I don't understand." "The Hartford Industries merger needs someone brilliant to oversee the financial integration. Someone I can trust completely," Alexander explained. "I've been watching you work, Miss Mitchell. You're not just good at your job, you're exceptional." Sarah's hands shook as she took the envelope. "But why now? Why tonight?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentler than she had ever heard it. "Because your message reminded me that life is short, and sometimes we have to take risks for what we want." "Mr. Hartwell," Sarah began, but he held up a hand. "Alexander," he corrected. "And before you say anything else, I want you to know that this promotion has nothing to do with what happened tonight. I've been planning this for weeks." Sarah looked down at the envelope, her mind racing. 60% more money would change everything. She could help Danny with medical school without sacrificing her own future. She could afford a car, a better apartment, maybe even some nice clothes. "There's more," Alexander said quietly. Sarah looked up at him, hardly daring to hope. The position would require travel. Conferences in New York, meetings with clients in Los Angeles, oversight of international accounts. Alexander paused, his gray eyes never leaving hers. "I would personally oversee your training and development." The implications hung in the air between them. Sarah's heart hammered as she realized what he was offering wasn't just a job. It was an entirely different life. "I can't," Sarah whispered. "I have Jake, and my life is here, and you're 25 years old, brilliant, and wasting your potential on a man who makes you apologize for your ambition," Alexander said firmly. Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. Everything he was saying was true. But it was also terrifying. Jake was safe, familiar. This, whatever this was, felt dangerous and overwhelming. Alexander pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. The gesture was so unexpected and gentle that Sarah began to cry harder. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "This is so unprofessional. I should go home and pretend tonight never happened." "Or," Alexander said softly, kneeling beside her chair, "you could stay and let me show you what your life could be like." Sarah looked up at Alexander through her tears, her breath catching as she realized how close he was. Kneeling beside her chair, his usual cold demeanor had completely disappeared, replaced by something warm and intense that made her heart race. "I can't think clearly," Sarah whispered, dabbing at her eyes with his handkerchief. "This is all too much. A few hours ago, you barely knew I existed. And now?" "Now you know that's not true," Alexander said gently. "I've noticed everything about you, Sarah. The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating, how you always arrive 15 minutes early even when the buses are delayed, the fact that you keep a photo of your brother in your desk drawer, but no picture of Jake." Sarah's eyes widened. "How do you know about Danny's picture?" Alexander's cheeks colored slightly. "I may have walked by your desk more often than necessary." Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling through her tears. "You were checking up on me. Pathetically obvious, wasn't it?" Alexander stood and returned to his chair, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I've been trying to figure out how to talk to you without seeming like the typical boss taking advantage of his position." Sarah studied his face, seeing vulnerability there she had never noticed before. "Is that what this is? You taking advantage?" Alexander's expression grew serious. "God, I hope not. Sarah, I want you to know that everything I've offered tonight, the promotion, the opportunities, they're real regardless of anything personal between us. You've earned them." Sarah looked down at the envelope in her hands, the weight of it representing not just money, but choices she had never imagined having. "What if I take the job and things get complicated between us?" "Then we'll handle it professionally," Alexander said. "But what if we don't take the chance and spend the rest of our lives wondering, what if?" Sarah's phone buzzed, making them both jump. Jake's name appeared on the screen with a message. "Why haven't you replied?" Getting worried, the real world crashed back into Sarah's consciousness. She had been sitting in Alexander's office for over an hour, completely forgetting about everything else in her life. "I should answer him," Sarah said, but she made no move to pick up the phone. Alexander noticed her hesitation. "What will you tell him?" Sarah stared at the phone, realizing she had no idea. How could she explain this night to Jake? How could she go back to their small apartment and pretend that Alexander hadn't just offered her everything she had ever dreamed of? "I don't know," she admitted. "Sarah," Alexander said carefully, "may I ask you something personal?" Sarah nodded, though her stomach clenched with apprehension. "When you think about your future with Jake, what do you see?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Marriage, eventually. Kids. A small house somewhere affordable. And your career? Sarah's silence spoke volumes. "He expects you to give it up," Alexander stated rather than asked. "He thinks I'll be happier," Sarah said defensively, but even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. Alexander leaned forward, his elbows on his desk. "And what do you think?" Sarah felt more tears threaten to fall. "I think I'm scared of wanting more because I've never believed I could have it." The honesty of her own words surprised her. She had never admitted that before, even to herself. Alexander's voice was gentle when he spoke. "Your text message tonight, the part about feeling worthless except as numbers on a page, that broke my heart, Sarah." "Do you know why?" Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Because you're brilliant. You're kind, hard-working, and you have more integrity than most people I've met in 20 years of business. You deserve someone who sees that, who wants to help you reach your potential instead of asking you to diminish yourself." Sarah wiped her eyes again, Alexander's words hitting deeper than she expected. "You barely know me. I know you gave up your lunch money last month to help Janet in accounting when her car broke down," Alexander said. "I know you work through weekends without complaining because you believe in doing your job well. I know you're supporting your brother's dreams, even while sacrificing your own." How do you know about Janet's car? Sarah asked, stunned. Alexander looked slightly embarrassed. I may have been paying more attention than I should have. When Janet mentioned your kindness to HR, it got back to me. Sarah stared at him in amazement. You've been watching me for months. Watching over you, Alexander corrected. There's a difference. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Jake. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the answer button. Take it, Alexander said quietly. But Sarah, whatever you decide tonight about the job, about us, make sure it's what you really want. Not what's safe, not what's expected, but what you truly want. Sarah answered the phone with a trembling voice. Hi, Jake. Finally. Where the hell are you? It's almost 1 a.m. Jake's voice was loud enough for Alexander to hear, his tone angry rather than concerned. I'm still at work. We had an emergency with some reports, Sarah said, her eyes meeting Alexander's across the desk. Jesus, Sarah, this is getting ridiculous. You can't keep living like this. When we get married, you're quitting that stupid job anyway, so why are you killing yourself for it now? Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. Alexander was right. Jake didn't want her to succeed. He wanted her to fail so she would need him more. I'll be home soon, Sarah said quietly. You better be. And Sarah, don't expect me to stay up waiting. Some of us have real jobs that don't require kissing rich assholes' feet all night. The line went dead. Sarah sat there holding the phone, feeling as if Jake had slapped her through the device. Alexander's jaw was tight with anger. Does he always speak to you like that? Sarah couldn't answer. She was too busy realizing that yes, Jake did always speak to her like that, and she had been telling herself it was because he loved her and wanted to protect her from disappointment. Sarah, Alexander said gently, you deserve better than that. You deserve someone who celebrates your successes instead of resenting them. Sarah stared at her phone long after Jake had hung up, his harsh words echoing in her mind. The contrast between his anger and Alexander's gentle encouragement was so stark it made her chest ache. She had never noticed how small Jake's words made her feel until she experienced what it was like to have someone believe in her. I should go, Sarah said finally, though she made no move to stand. Alexander studied her face carefully. Where will you go, Sarah? Back to that apartment where you'll spend the night wondering why someone who supposedly loves you speaks to you like an enemy. Sarah flinched at the accuracy of his words. It's not that simple. Isn't it? Alexander stood and walked to the window again, his hands in his pockets. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you, Sarah. I see a woman who's intelligent enough to revolutionize this industry, kind enough to sacrifice her own comfort for others, and strong enough to work 18-hour days without complaint. But somehow, you've convinced yourself you don't deserve more than scraps of affection from a man who diminishes your dreams. Sarah felt tears threatening again. You don't understand. Jake and I have history. We grew up in the same neighborhood. He knows where I come from. And he uses that to keep you small, Alexander said, turning to face her. Sarah, where you come from doesn't define where you can go. Alexander moved to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. Do you know what this is? Sarah shook her head. Your employee file, your performance reviews, your college transcripts, letters of recommendation. Alexander opened the folder. Top of your class in accounting, magna cum laude despite working 2 jobs to pay for school. Your professors called you exceptional and brilliant. Your work here has been flawless from day one. Sarah stared at the folder in amazement. Why do you have all that? Because I've been building a case for your promotion for months, Alexander said. But more than that, I've been trying to understand how someone so accomplished could think so little of herself. Alexander sat on the edge of his desk again, closer to her. Your background isn't a limitation, Sarah. It's proof of your strength. Do you know how rare it is to find someone who works as hard as you do while maintaining your integrity and kindness?" Sarah looked up at him, feeling something shift inside her chest. "You really see me that way?" "I see you exactly as you are," Alexander said softly. Remarkable. The word hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Sarah felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crack, and she wasn't sure if that terrified or exhilarated her. "Alexander," she began, then stopped, shocked at how natural his name felt on her lips. "Say it again," he said quietly. "Alexander." This time, Sarah let the name linger, watching as something heated flashed in his gray eyes. "I've wanted to hear my name in your voice for months," he admitted. Sarah's breath caught. "This is crazy." "A few hours ago, I thought you barely tolerated me." Alexander laughed softly, the sound sending warmth through Sarah's chest. "Barely tolerated?" "Sarah, I've been fighting the urge to find excuses to talk to you every single day. Why do you think I always personally reviewed your reports?" "Because you're a perfectionist," Sarah suggested weakly. "Because they were the only way I could justify spending time focused on you," Alexander admitted. "Do you remember the Miller account you handled last month?" Sarah nodded. It had been a complex audit that had taken her weeks to untangle. "You found a discrepancy that saved the client $2 million. Do you know what I did when I read your report?" Sarah shook her head. "I called my father and bragged about the brilliant accountant on my team," Alexander said. "He asked if I was planning to promote you, and I realized I'd been looking for an excuse to elevate you to a position where we'd work more closely together." Sarah felt her world tilting on its axis. "You talked to your father about me." Alexander's cheeks colored slightly. "I may have mentioned you more than once. He's convinced I'm half in love with you." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah's heart hammered so loudly she was sure Alexander could hear it. "Are you?" she whispered. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes never leaving hers. "I'm afraid I'm more than half in love with you, Sarah Mitchell." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever looked at her the way Alexander was looking at her now, like she was precious, like she was something worth treasuring. "I can't," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Can't what?" Alexander asked gently. "Can't throw away 3 years with Jake for one night of fantasy," Sarah said, though even as she spoke, she realized how hollow the words sounded. Alexander nodded slowly. "You're right. This isn't about one night." Sarah looked up at him sharply. "If this were just physical attraction, I would never have risked your career by offering you that promotion," Alexander continued. "Sarah, what I'm feeling for you, it's the kind of thing that changes everything. Forever." Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The city sparkled below them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of choices. "You barely know me." "I know you take your coffee black because you can't afford cream," Alexander said quietly. "I know you wear the same 3 blouses in rotation because you're saving money for Danny's tuition. I know you stay late not because you're slow, but because you double-check everything to make sure it's perfect." Sarah turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Stop. I know you deserve better than a man who makes you feel guilty for being extraordinary," Alexander continued, standing and moving toward her. "I know you're scared because everything in your life has taught you not to want more than you have." "Please stop," Sarah whispered. Alexander was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "I know that if you walk out that door tonight and go back to your old life, you'll spend the rest of your days wondering what might have been. And so will I." Sarah looked up into his face, seeing her own longing reflected in his eyes. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to be brave, Alexander said softly. I'm asking you to take a chance on yourself. On us. Sarah stared up into Alexander's face, her heart pounding so violently she felt dizzy. Everything about this moment felt surreal. Standing in his luxurious office at 1 a.m, seeing vulnerability in eyes she had always thought were cold, feeling desired by a man she had never imagined could see her as anything more than an employee. I don't know how to be brave, Sarah whispered. Alexander's hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he gently cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. You've been brave your whole life, Sarah, working your way through college, taking care of your brother, surviving in this ruthless industry. You just don't recognize your own courage. Sarah closed her eyes at his touch, her skin tingling where his fingers made contact. This feels like a dream. Then don't wake up, Alexander said softly. Sarah opened her eyes, meeting his intense gaze. What if I'm not who you think I am? What if I disappoint you? Alexander's smile was gentle and real. Impossible. Alexander, Sarah began, but he shook his head. Before you say anything else, Alexander said, his thumb still tracing her cheekbone, I want you to know that regardless of what happens between us personally, that promotion is yours if you want it. You've earned it through your own merit. Sarah felt a tear slip down her cheek. You're making this very difficult. Good, Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. It should be difficult. Easy choices rarely change our lives. Sarah's phone buzzed again with another text from Jake. She didn't look at it, but they both heard the notification. The sound brought reality crashing back into their intimate bubble. He's waiting for me, Sarah said, though she made no move to step away from Alexander's touch. And I'm standing right here, Alexander replied. The question is, what does your heart want? Sarah closed her eyes again, overwhelmed by the impossibility of the situation. My heart wants things I've never let myself imagine. Like what? Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. Sarah opened her eyes, surprised by her own boldness as she spoke. Like someone who sees me as an equal instead of a burden. Like work that challenges me instead of just paying bills. Like feeling beautiful instead of adequate. You are beautiful, Alexander said fiercely. You're stunning, Sarah. How has no one ever told you that? Sarah's breath caught at the intensity in his voice. Jake says I'm pretty sometimes, but he usually follows it with something about how I shouldn't let it go to my head. Alexander's jaw tightened with anger. He spent 3 years systematically destroying your confidence. That's not, Sarah began, then stopped. Looking at it through Alexander's eyes, she could see the pattern she had been blind to before. Sarah, Alexander said gently, when was the last time Jake made you feel proud of yourself? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, searching her memory. She couldn't remember a single instance. And when was the last time he supported your dreams instead of discouraging them? Again, Sarah couldn't find an answer. Alexander's hands moved to frame her face, his touch gentle but sure. You deserve someone who celebrates your successes, who encourages your ambitions, who makes you feel like you can conquer the world. Someone like you? Sarah whispered. I hope so, Alexander replied honestly. I want to be the man who helps you reach your potential instead of asking you to diminish it. I want to be the one who makes you feel beautiful and brilliant and worthy of everything good in this world. Sarah felt her resolve cracking like ice in spring. Alexander, if I stay tonight, if I make this choice, there's no going back. I know, he said simply. I'm scared, Sarah admitted. Alexander's thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. So am I. I've never felt this way about anyone, Sarah. You terrify me in the best possible way. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing truth there that took her breath away. What happens now? Now you decide, Alexander said. Door or window? Sarah looked at him in confusion. What? Alexander smiled, the expression transforming his face. The door leads back to your old life. Safe, predictable, small. The window. He gestured toward the floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city. The window is the view from where you could be. Your choice. Sarah turned to look out the window, seeing the city spread below them like a constellation of possibilities. Then she looked back at the door, thinking of Jake waiting in their cramped apartment, already angry with her for being ambitious. If I choose the window, Sarah said slowly, what does that mean exactly? Alexander's hands dropped to her shoulders. It means you take the promotion. It means you let me show you a world where your intelligence is valued and your dreams are encouraged. It means we explore whatever this is between us, honestly and openly. And if it doesn't work out between us, then you'll still be a successful senior financial analyst with a bright future ahead of you, Alexander said. The professional opportunity isn't contingent on the personal one, Sarah. I need you to believe that. Sarah studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. She found only sincerity and something that looked remarkably like hope. I need to ask you something, Sarah said. Anything. Why me? You could have any woman you want. Rich women, sophisticated women, women who know how to navigate your world. Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Do you want the truth? Sarah nodded. Because rich, sophisticated women who know my world are typically interested in my money, my status, my connections. They see Alexander Hartwell, the heir to a financial empire. But you... Alexander paused, his gray eyes intense. You see me. I don't understand. When you look at me, Sarah, I don't see calculation or ambition for social climbing. I see someone who responds to kindness, who works hard regardless of recognition, who gives her own lunch money to help a coworker. You're real in a world full of people wearing masks. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. You really see me that way? I see you exactly as you are, Alexander said, and exactly as you could become with the right support and opportunities. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with a call. Jake's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah realized she had been gone for over 2 hours without explanation. I have to answer, Sarah said reluctantly. Alexander nodded, stepping back to give her space but not leaving the room. Sarah answered with a shaking voice. Jake? Where the fuck are you? Jake's voice was slurred with alcohol and fury. I've been calling and texting for hours. Sarah flinched at his tone. I told you I was working late. Bullshit. No job requires you to stay out past 2 in the morning. You're cheating on me, aren't you? Sarah felt as if Jake had slapped her through the phone. His accusation hung in the air, made worse by the fact that, while she hadn't cheated physically, her heart had certainly strayed far from their relationship tonight. I'm not cheating, Jake, Sarah said, her voice barely steady. I really am at work. Prove it, Jake demanded, his words slurred with alcohol. Send me a picture right now. Sarah looked around Alexander's luxurious office, knowing that any photo would only make things worse. Jake, you're drunk. Can we talk about this when I get home? Don't tell me I'm drunk, Jake shouted loud enough for Alexander to hear clearly. I'm sick of your excuses, Sarah. Ever since you got that corporate job, you think you're better than me. Sarah felt tears begin to flow again, but this time they were tears of realization rather than confusion. Jake, please don't do this. Do what? Call you out on your lies. I know what kind of men work at those fancy firms, Sarah. Rich assholes who think they can buy anything they want, including other men's girlfriends. Alexander's expression darkened at Jake's words, but he remained silent, letting Sarah handle the call. That's not what this is about, Sarah said weakly. Then come home. Right now. Leave your precious job and prove to me that I matter more than your career. Sarah felt something inside her snap. The demand was so familiar, so controlling, and for the first time she could see it clearly. My career matters, Jake. It matters to me. More than I do. Jake's voice turned cold and manipulative. Is that what you're telling me, Sarah? That your job is more important than the man who loves you? Sarah looked across the office at Alexander, who was watching her with concern and something that looked like pride. Here was a man who wanted to elevate her career, not diminish it. The contrast was so stark, it took her breath away. Jake, Sarah said slowly, why can't both things matter? Why can't you be proud that I'm good at my job instead of threatened by it? Because real women support their men instead of competing with them, Jake snarled. But you've always thought you were too good for me, haven't you? Little Sarah Mitchell thinks she's going to be some hot-shot businesswoman. Sarah felt Alexander stiffen with anger at Jake's cruel words. She found herself looking at him instead of focusing on the phone, drawing strength from his supportive presence. Maybe I do want to be successful, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. Maybe there's nothing wrong with that. There is when it means you forget who you really are, Jake shot back. You're not some corporate princess, Sarah. You're a working-class girl from the wrong side of town, and you need to remember that. Alexander moved closer, his presence a reminder that someone believed she could be more than her circumstances. Jake, Sarah said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. What? Jake's tone was suspicious. Do you want me to succeed? In my career, I mean. Do you want me to get promoted and make more money and have opportunities? Jake was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could hear him breathing heavily. I want you to be happy. That's not what I asked. Another pause. I don't want you to change, Sarah. I fell in love with the girl who needed me, not some corporate bitch who thinks she's too good for her own boyfriend. Sarah felt the last of her illusions shatter. Jake didn't want her to succeed because her success threatened his control over her. He wanted her to stay small, dependent, grateful for his attention. I have to go, Sarah said quietly. Sarah, don't you dare hang up on me. Sarah ended the call and immediately turned off her phone. Her hands were shaking, but for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe clearly. Are you all right? Alexander asked gently. Sarah laughed, a sound caught between tears and relief. I think I'm having the most important revelation of my life. Alexander moved closer, his eyes concerned. What kind of revelation? That I've been in an abusive relationship and calling it love, Sarah said, the words feeling strange but true on her tongue. Jake doesn't want to protect me from disappointment. He wants to keep me from outgrowing him. Alexander nodded slowly. That's a painful realization, but an important one. Sarah looked up at him, seeing her future reflected in his caring eyes. Alexander, what you said before about being brave, I think I'm ready to try. Alexander's face lit up with hope and something deeper. What does that mean exactly? Sarah took a deep breath, feeling as if she was standing at the edge of a cliff. It means I choose the window. Alexander's smile was radiant. Are you sure? No, Sarah said honestly. I'm terrified. But I'm more afraid of spending my life wondering what could have been. Alexander stepped closer, his hands finding hers. Sarah, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we explore what's between us, I don't want it to be because you're running from Jake. I want it to be because you're running towards something better. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the depth of emotion there. I am. For the first time in my life, I'm running towards something instead of just surviving what I have. Alexander's hands came up to frame her face again, his touch sending electricity through her entire body. "Then let me show you what your life could look like." "How?" Sarah whispered. Alexander smiled, his gray eyes warm and full of promise. "Trust me." He moved to his desk and picked up his phone, dialing a number. "James? It's Alexander. I need the car brought around to the parking garage." "Yes, I know what time it is. Thank you." Sarah watched in amazement. "Where are we going?" Alexander's smile was mysterious and gentle. "Somewhere that you can see the sunrise without worrying about catching a bus to work." Sarah felt her heart flutter. "Alexander, I can't just disappear. I have responsibilities." "Which will all be there tomorrow," Alexander said, moving back to her. "But tonight, just this once, let someone take care of you." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing sincerity and affection there that took her breath away. "What about work tomorrow?" "You're the new senior financial analyst," Alexander said with a grin. "I think your boss will understand if you're a little late." Sarah laughed despite her nerves. "This is insane." "The best things usually are," Alexander replied, offering her his arm. "Shall we?" Sarah hesitated for one more moment, thinking of her small apartment, her predictable life, Jake's anger waiting for her at home. Then she looked at Alexander, at the opportunity he represented, at the chance to become the woman she had always dreamed of being. She took his arm. "Let's go." The elevator ride to the parking garage felt like descending into a dream. Sarah stood beside Alexander, acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way he kept glancing at her with something that looked like wonder in his eyes. She caught their reflection in the polished steel doors and hardly recognized herself. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with excitement and fear, and for the first time in years, she looked alive. "Alexander," Sarah said softly as they reached the garage level, "I need you to know something." He turned to her, his full attention focused on her words. "What is it?" "I've never done anything like this before," Sarah admitted, her cheeks warming. "I've never been spontaneous or reckless or brave enough to choose yourself over what's expected," Alexander finished gently. Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in her throat. Alexander's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "Then tonight will be a first for both of us." The garage doors opened to reveal a sleek black car waiting for them, a uniformed driver standing beside the passenger door. Sarah had seen cars like this in movies, but never imagined she would ride in one. "Mr. Hartwell," the driver said with a respectful nod. "Good evening, Miss James. This is Sarah Mitchell," Alexander said warmly. "She'll be working closely with me on the Hartford Industries merger." Sarah felt a flutter of pride at being introduced as a colleague, rather than just a date. It was a small gesture, but it showed Alexander's respect for her professional capabilities. As they settled into the luxurious leather seats, Sarah marveled at the interior of the car. Everything was elegant and comfortable, with soft lighting and climate control that made her cheap coat feel suddenly inadequate. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, as they pulled out of the garage onto the empty city streets. Alexander smiled mysteriously. "Somewhere I go when I need to think clearly. Somewhere we can talk without interruptions or expectations." Sarah watched the city blur past the tinted windows, feeling like she was in a movie. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "What made you notice me?" "Really? There are dozens of women at the firm, some of them beautiful and polished, and from your world." Alexander was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Do you remember the Thanksgiving potluck last year?" Sarah nodded. It had been a small office gathering, nothing fancy. "You brought homemade apple pie," Alexander continued. "Not store-bought cookies like everyone else, but pie you had made from scratch, despite working 60-hour weeks." Sarah remembered the pie. She had stayed up late the night before, determined to contribute something special, even though she could barely afford the ingredients. "I watched you serve slices to everyone else first," Alexander said. "You made sure the cleaning staff and security guards got pieces before you took any for yourself. And when there wasn't enough left for you, you just smiled and said you weren't hungry." Sarah's eyes widened. "You saw that?" "I saw a woman who cared more about others' happiness than her own comfort," Alexander said. "I went to 3 different bakeries that night, looking for apple pie, so I could bring you a slice the next day." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "You did that?" Alexander looked almost embarrassed. "I left it on your desk with a note that said it was from the Office Appreciation Fund." Sarah gasped. "That was you?" "I thought it was from HR." Alexander's smile was gentle. "I couldn't figure out how to give it to you directly without seeming inappropriate, but I wanted you to have something special." Sarah stared at him in amazement. "You've been looking out for me for over a year." "Longer than that," Alexander admitted. "But the pie incident was when I realized my feelings were more than professional admiration." The car began to climb a winding road, leaving the city lights behind. Sarah could see they were heading into the hills, overlooking the metropolitan area. "Alexander," Sarah said softly, "what if this is all moving too fast? What if tomorrow morning I wake up and realize I've made a terrible mistake?" Alexander turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Then we'll deal with it tomorrow morning. But Sarah, sometimes life requires us to take leaps of faith. The question is whether you trust me enough to jump." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing sincerity and hope there. "I do trust you. That's what scares me most." The car pulled to a stop at what appeared to be a private residence, a modern glass and steel house perched on a hillside with panoramic views of the city below. Warm light glowed from the windows, and Sarah could see a terrace overlooking the valley. "This is your house?" Sarah asked in amazement. Alexander nodded. "I bought it for the view. I find it helps me gain perspective when I'm dealing with difficult decisions." As they walked toward the entrance, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the evening's events. A few hours ago, she had been a struggling accountant in a cramped cubicle. Now she was being led into a millionaire's private home, having just ended a 3-year relationship and accepted a promotion that would change her life. "Are you having second thoughts?" Alexander asked, noticing her hesitation. Sarah looked up at the house, then back at Alexander's concerned face. "I'm having all the thoughts. But the strongest one is that I don't want this night to end." Alexander's smile was radiant. "Then let's make sure it doesn't have to." Inside, the house was even more stunning than Sarah had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered unobstructed views of the city. Modern furniture created intimate conversation areas, and soft lighting made everything feel warm and inviting rather than cold and intimidating. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, moving toward the windows. Alexander joined her, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I've looked at this view thousands of times, but I've never seen it with someone I wanted to share it with." Sarah turned to look at him, struck by the vulnerability in his voice. "Alexander, what are we doing?" "We're taking a chance," he said simply. "We're choosing possibility over certainty." Alexander moved to a bar area and poured 2 glasses of wine, offering one to Sarah. "To new beginnings." Sarah accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his. "To being brave enough to want more." They clinked glasses, and Sarah took a sip of wine that was probably worth more than her weekly grocery budget. But it wasn't the expensive wine that made her feel intoxicated. It was the way Alexander was looking at her, like she was something precious and rare. "Can I show you something?" Alexander asked. Sarah nodded, following him to a room that appeared to be his home office. But unlike his corporate office, this space felt personal and lived in, with photographs on the desk and books lining the walls. Alexander picked up a framed photo and handed it to Sarah. It showed a younger Alexander with a beautiful woman who had his same gray eyes. "My mother," Alexander explained. "She died when I was 15. Sarah studied the photo, seeing warmth and intelligence in the woman's face. She was beautiful. She was brilliant, Alexander said. A financial analyst, actually. She taught me that success means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with." Sarah looked up at him, understanding flooding through her. "Is that why you've never married? Why you haven't found someone to share this with?" Alexander's eyes met hers. "I've been waiting for someone who saw me the way my mother saw my father. Not as a provider or a status symbol, but as a partner." Sarah felt her breath catch at the intensity of his gaze. "And you think I could be that person?" "I think you already are," Alexander said softly. Sarah set down the photograph with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in Alexander's words. Standing in his private sanctuary, surrounded by pieces of his real life rather than his corporate persona, she felt the magnitude of what was happening between them. "Alexander," Sarah whispered, "I need you to understand something about me." He moved closer, his gray eyes attentive and patient. "Tell me." "I've spent my whole life believing I wasn't worth much," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "My father left when I was 12. My mother worked 3 jobs just to keep us fed. Jake was the first man who ever said he loved me, and I was so grateful for that attention that I ignored all the ways he made me feel small." Alexander's expression grew tender. "And now?" Sarah looked around his beautiful home, then back at his face. "Now, I'm standing in a millionaire's house, being told I'm worthy of love and success and respect, and I don't know how to process that." Alexander reached for her hands, holding them gently. "You process it by accepting that it's true. Sarah, your worth isn't determined by your past, or your bank account, or anyone else's opinion. It's inherent. It's yours. And it's been there all along." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. "How do you know all the right things to say?" Alexander's smile was sad and beautiful. "Because I've spent 15 years building walls around my heart, telling myself I didn't need anyone, that success was enough. But watching you these past months, seeing your kindness and integrity and strength, made me realize I was just hiding from the possibility of real connection." Sarah stepped closer to him, drawn by his honesty. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you didn't just accidentally send that text to me tonight," Alexander said, his voice rough with emotion. "Maybe the universe decided we'd both been alone long enough." Sarah laughed through her tears. "You believe in fate?" "I believe in recognizing a gift when it appears," Alexander replied, his hand still holding hers. "And you, Sarah Mitchell, are the most extraordinary gift I've ever received." Sarah felt her heart crack open, years of careful protection crumbling at his words. "I'm scared, Alexander. I'm scared of how much I want this." "Want what?" he asked gently. Sarah took a shaky breath. "Everything. The job, the opportunities, you. I want to be the woman you see when you look at me." Alexander's hands moved to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You already are that woman. You just need to let yourself believe it." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing her own longing reflected there. "Show me." The words hung between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Alexander's breath caught, and for a moment they stood frozen, balanced on the edge of changing everything. "Sarah," Alexander said carefully, "if we cross this line, there's no pretending it's just about business anymore." "I know," Sarah whispered. "And if we do this, I want you to know it's not just tonight for me. I don't want a fling or an affair. I want something real." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. What does real look like to you? Alexander's smile was gentle and certain. Real looks like partnership. Real looks like building something together, professionally and personally. Real looks like me supporting your dreams while you help me remember what it means to be human instead of just successful. Sarah felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. That sounds terrifying and wonderful. The best things usually do, Alexander said, echoing his earlier words. Sarah reached up and touched his face, marveling at the way he leaned into her palm. Alexander, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if this doesn't work out, if we try and fail, you won't let it affect my career. Promise me the promotion is real, regardless of what happens between us personally. Alexander's expression grew fierce. Sarah, I swear to you, on my mother's memory, that your professional opportunities are based entirely on your merit. Whether we work out romantically or not, you've earned every chance I'm offering you professionally. Sarah studied his face, looking for any hint of deception. She found only sincerity and something that looked remarkably like love. I believe you, Sarah said finally. Alexander's relief was palpable. Thank you for trusting me, Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Now what? Alexander's answering smile was warm and full of promise. Now, I make you dinner, and we watch the sunrise together. Sarah laughed. You cook? I have many hidden talents, Alexander said with a grin that made her stomach flutter. They moved to his kitchen, which was as stunning as the rest of the house. Granite counters, professional appliances, and a view of the city that made Sarah feel like she was floating above her old life. Alexander rolled up his sleeves and began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. I hope you like omelets, because that's about the extent of my culinary skills. Sarah watched him work, charmed by this domestic side of the man she had only known as an intimidating executive. Can I help? You can tell me about yourself, Alexander said, whisking eggs with surprising competence. Real things. What you dream about, what you're afraid of, what makes you laugh. Sarah perched on a bar stool, sipping wine and feeling more relaxed than she had in months. I dream about traveling, she said. I've never been anywhere except this city. I'd love to see Paris, or Rome, or even just the ocean. Alexander glanced up from the stove. What's stopping you? Sarah laughed. Money, time, courage. The usual suspects. The Hartford Industries merger requires oversight of their European operations, Alexander said casually. Someone would need to spend a month in London and Paris, reviewing their financial systems. Sarah's eyes widened. Are you offering me a business trip to Europe? Alexander's grin was mischievous. I'm offering you a chance to see the world while doing work you're brilliant at. Sarah felt giddy with possibility. A month in Europe? With an experienced mentor to show you the ropes, Alexander added, sliding a perfect omelet onto a plate in front of her. Sarah took a bite, surprised by how delicious it was. This is incredible. My mother's recipe, Alexander said, sitting beside her with his own plate. She believed that if you couldn't cook at least one thing well, you'd never be truly independent. Sarah smiled at the story, charmed by this glimpse into his childhood. Tell me about her. What was she like? Alexander's expression grew soft with memory. She was fierce and gentle at the same time. She could negotiate million-dollar deals during the day, and then come home and help me with homework at night. She taught me that strength and kindness weren't opposites, they were partners. She sounds wonderful, Sarah said. She would have loved you, Alexander said with certainty. She always said I needed someone who would challenge me to be better while accepting me exactly as I am. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. And you think that's me? Alexander reached for her hand. "I know it's you." As they ate and talked, Sarah felt herself relaxing completely for the first time in years. Alexander was funny and thoughtful, asking about her brother's medical school progress and her hopes for the future. He listened to her stories about growing up with genuine interest, never making her feel like her background was something to overcome. When they finished eating, Alexander led her to the terrace overlooking the city. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, painting the horizon with shades of pink and gold. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, leaning against the railing. Alexander stood behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "Not as beautiful as you." Sarah leaned back against his chest, feeling safe and cherished in a way that was completely new to her. "Alexander, what happens now? When the sun comes up and the real world intrudes." "The real world doesn't have to intrude," Alexander said softly. "We can make our own reality." As the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and rose, Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Standing on Alexander's terrace, wrapped in his warmth and gazing out over a city full of possibilities, she realized she was no longer the same woman who had accidentally sent that text message hours earlier. "I can see my apartment building from here," Sarah said, pointing to a cluster of run-down buildings in the distance. Alexander's arms tightened around her. "And how does it look from up here?" Sarah considered the question, watching the tiny windows catch the morning light. "Small, like something I've already outgrown." Alexander pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "That's because you have outgrown it. You just needed to gain some altitude to see it clearly." Sarah turned in his arms, looking up into his face. The rising sun cast golden highlights in his dark hair and made his gray eyes look like silver. "Alexander, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Always," he promised. "Do you really believe I can succeed in your world?" "Not just as your..." Sarah struggled for the right word. "Your girlfriend or whatever this is, but as a professional? Do you think I have what it takes to handle senior-level responsibilities?" Alexander's expression grew serious and intense. "Sarah, in 3 years of working with hundreds of financial professionals, I have never encountered anyone with your combination of analytical skills, ethical standards, and natural intelligence. The fact that you are asking that question proves you have the humility and self-awareness that most successful people lack." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the conviction in his voice. "More than that," Alexander continued, "you have something that can't be taught: integrity. In an industry where people constantly cut corners and compromise their values for profit, you've maintained your principles despite having every reason to become cynical." "Even when it meant staying poor?" Sarah asked softly. "Especially then," Alexander said firmly. "Sarah, do you know why I've been so successful in business?" Sarah shook her head. "Because I learned early that the most valuable asset in any deal is trust. Clients, partners, investors, they all want to work with someone they can count on to tell them the truth, even when it's difficult. You have that rare quality, and combined with your skills, it makes you invaluable." Sarah felt a warm glow of pride spread through her chest. "You really mean that?" "I've never meant anything more," Alexander said. "Sarah, I'm not offering you opportunities because I'm attracted to you. I'm attracted to you because you're the kind of person who deserves extraordinary opportunities." The distinction made Sarah's heart flutter with joy and relief. "So when I walk into that office on Monday as senior financial analyst, you'll be walking in as the most qualified person for the job," Alexander finished, "and anyone who doubts that will quickly discover their mistake." Sarah reached up and cupped his face, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. "How is it possible that I've known you for 3 years, but I'm just meeting you now?" Alexander's smile was rueful. Because I was too afraid to let you see the real me. Too worried about maintaining professional boundaries and protecting my reputation as the cold, untouchable CEO. And what changed your mind? Alexander's eyes grew warm and vulnerable. You did, Sarah, watching you work with such dedication while maintaining your kindness, seeing you sacrifice for your brother while never asking for recognition. It made me realize that hiding behind a professional mask was just another form of cowardice. Sarah felt her breath catch at his honesty. What are you saying? I'm saying that loving you has already made me braver than I've been in 15 years, Alexander said softly. The word loving hung between them, precious and fragile and full of promise. Sarah felt her heart stop, then restart at double speed. Alexander, she whispered. I know it's too soon to say that, Alexander said quickly. I know we've only been honest about our feelings for a few hours. But Sarah, I need you to know that what I feel for you isn't temporary or convenient or based on fantasy. It's real, it's deep, and it's the most certain thing I've ever experienced. Sarah stood on her tiptoes and kissed him softly, pouring all her gratitude and hope and newfound courage into the gentle contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. I love you too, Sarah whispered against his lips. I think I have for months, but I was too afraid to admit it even to myself. Alexander's smile was radiant and relieved. Really? Sarah laughed at the vulnerability in his voice. Really? Alexander, you've made me feel beautiful and valuable and capable for the first time in my life. How could I not love you for that? Alexander pulled her closer, holding her as if she were precious and fragile. What happens now, Sarah? What do you want our future to look like? Sarah looked out over the city again, then back into Alexander's eyes. I want to take that promotion. I want to learn everything you can teach me about business and finance. I want to travel to Europe and see the world and discover what I'm truly capable of. And personally? Alexander asked. Sarah's smile was shy but certain. Personally, I want to see where this leads. I want to learn who I am when I'm not afraid, and I want to discover who we could be together. Alexander's kiss was deeper this time, full of promise and passion and joy. When they broke apart, Sarah felt dizzy with happiness. There's one more thing, Sarah said as they headed back inside the house. What's that? Sarah grinned mischievously. I need to call in sick to work today. I have a feeling my boss is going to be very understanding about it. Alexander laughed, the sound rich and warm and full of love. I think that can be arranged. In fact, I insist on it. Senior financial analysts need their rest before starting such important new positions. As they settled onto Alexander's couch to watch the rest of the sunrise through the massive windows, Sarah curled against his side and marveled at how perfectly she fit there. For the first time in her adult life, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Her phone, still turned off from the night before, sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. Sarah knew there would be dozens of angry messages from Jake, demands and threats and accusations. But those belonged to her old life, the small life she had finally found the courage to outgrow. This, Alexander's arms around her, the city spreading out below them, a future full of possibilities stretching ahead. This was her new reality, and she had never been more ready to embrace it. Alexander? Sarah said sleepily, exhaustion from the emotional night finally catching up with her. His voice was warm against her hair. Thank you for seeing me. For really seeing me. Alexander's arms tightened around her. Thank you for letting me. As the sun climbed higher over the city, Sarah Mitchell fell asleep in the arms of the man who had changed her life with a single, accidentally received text message. And for the first time in years, Her dreams were full of hope instead of fear, possibility instead of limitation, and love instead of mere survival. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the conference room of Morrison and Associates' London office, presenting quarterly projections to a room full of international executives. Her burgundy suit was perfectly tailored, her hair styled in a professional chignon, and her voice carried the confidence of someone who had finally found her place in the world. The European market integration has exceeded all projections, Sarah concluded, clicking to her final slide. I recommend we accelerate the timeline for Phase 2 implementation. Applause filled the room as the executives nodded their approval. Sarah caught Alexander's eye across the table and saw the pride and love there that still made her heart flutter, even after months of building their life together. After the meeting, as the room emptied, Alexander approached her with that familiar smile that had become Sarah's favorite sight in the world. "Brilliant as always, Senior Financial Analyst Mitchell," Alexander said, his voice warm with admiration. Sarah grinned, still getting used to her new title and the respect it commanded. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell. Though I think the credit belongs to my excellent mentor." Alexander's eyes grew tender. "The credit belongs entirely to your own talents and hard work. I just provided the opportunity." Sarah looked around the elegant London office, thinking about how far she had traveled, not just geographically, but personally. The scared, undervalued woman who had accidentally sent that text message felt like someone from another lifetime. "Penny for your thoughts?" Alexander asked, noticing her contemplation. Sarah smiled, moving closer to him. "I was just thinking about that night in your office, when I thought my career was over." Alexander's laugh was rich and warm. "Best mistake you ever made." "Was it a mistake?" Sarah asked thoughtfully. "Sometimes, I wonder if some part of me knew exactly what I was doing." Alexander considered this, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Maybe your heart was braver than your mind was ready to be." Their private moment was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with a call. She glanced at the screen and froze. Jake's name appeared, the first time he had tried to contact her in 3 months. Alexander noticed her expression. "Everything all right?" Sarah showed him the screen. "Jake." I thought he had finally given up. "Do you want to answer it?" Alexander asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah looked at the phone, then at Alexander's concerned face, then out the window at the London skyline that had become as familiar as home. "You know what?" "I do." She answered the call with a steady voice. "Hello, Jake." "Jesus, Sarah, finally. I've been trying to reach you for months." Jake's voice was slurred, and Sarah could hear bar noise in the background. "I've been busy," Sarah said simply. "Busy with your rich boyfriend?" Jake's tone was bitter and accusatory. "Yeah, I heard all about it. Little Sarah Mitchell thinks she's too good for her old life now." Sarah felt a familiar stab of pain at his cruel words, but this time it was tempered by the knowledge of her own worth. "Jake, why are you calling?" "Because I miss you," Jake said, his voice turning manipulative in the old familiar way. "Because I realize I made mistakes, and I want you to come home. We can work this out, Sarah. We belong together." Sarah looked at Alexander, who was watching her with supportive concern, but no possessiveness or jealousy. He trusted her completely to handle this herself. "Jake," Sarah said gently, "I'm not coming home." "I am home." "You can't be serious," Jake sputtered. "You're gonna throw away 3 years for some corporate asshole who's just using you?" Sarah's voice remained calm and sure. "Alexander isn't using me, Jake. He's helping me become the person I always had the potential to be. He celebrates my successes instead of resenting them." "He's turned you into someone I don't recognize," Jake accused. Sarah smiled, looking around the London office that had become her professional sanctuary. "He's helped me recognize who I really am underneath all the fear and self-doubt. And Jake, I like who I am now." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Jake's voice returned, smaller and more desperate. "Sarah, please. I love you." Sarah felt a pang of sadness for the man who had once been her whole world. "Jake, I know you do, in the only way you know how. But love isn't supposed to make you smaller. It's supposed to help you grow." "And he makes you grow?" Jake asked bitterly. Sarah looked at Alexander, who was pretending to review documents to give her privacy, while staying close enough to offer support if she needed it. "He makes me believe I can do anything. He makes me feel valuable and capable and worthy of success. Most importantly, he makes me feel like his equal, not his burden." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "So that's it? You're really not coming back?" "No, Jake. I'm not coming back," Sarah said with finality. "I hope you find someone who makes you happy, someone who wants the same things you want. But that's not me anymore." Sarah ended the call and immediately turned off her phone, not wanting to deal with whatever angry response Jake might send. She looked up to find Alexander watching her with an expression of deep admiration. "That was beautifully handled," Alexander said softly. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, as if she had just closed the final chapter of her old life. It felt good to finally be completely honest with him. With myself. Alexander stood and moved to her, pulling her into his arms. "I'm proud of you." That couldn't have been easy. Sarah leaned into his warmth, marveling at how safe and supported she always felt with him. It was easier than I expected. A few months ago, I might have been tempted by his promises to change. But now— "Now?" Alexander prompted. Sarah looked up into his eyes, seeing her future reflected there, bright and full of possibility. "Now I know what real love feels like. I know what it's like to be with someone who wants me to succeed, who believes in my dreams, who sees my potential and helps me reach it." Alexander's smile was radiant. "And how does real love feel?" Sarah's answer came straight from her heart. "Like coming home and going on an adventure at the same time." Alexander kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Sarah Mitchell," Alexander said softly, "will you have dinner with me tonight? Not as your boss or your mentor, but as the man who loves you more than he ever thought possible." Sarah laughed, remembering all the formal dinner invitations that had marked the beginning of their professional relationship. "I thought you'd never ask." As they walked out of the London office together, hand in hand, Sarah caught their reflection in the building's glass doors. The woman looking back at her was confident, successful, and radiantly happy. Everything she had never dared to dream she could become. Her accidentally sent text message had led to so much more than a correction or an apology. It had led to a complete transformation of her life, a love deeper than she had known was possible, and a future bright with unlimited potential. Sarah squeezed Alexander's hand as they stepped out into the London afternoon, ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. Sometimes the best things in life begin with a beautiful mistake. What did you think of their story? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, what's your rating? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow all our stories. And check out more emotional stories by clicking on the end screen.